Welcome to the AI First Business Podcast with Tina Yazdi, where we show you how companies, teams, and leaders are turning AI hype into ROI. Awesome. Sumant, thank you so much for joining us.
Tina, thanks for having me on.
To kick things off, can you tell us a little bit about who is Sumant? And the main thing we're going to be speaking about is your newest venture, Pontus.
Yeah, so right now I work on Pontis. We help Global 2000 executives make cost centers into value drivers. That means we're automating all the inefficient work, such as manual data entry, creating reports that occurs in the largest enterprises in the world. And
And tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
yeah, I actually,
I love that you have a we
funnily,
culture, but we're interested in you.
I funnily enough started as a physicist. I don't think I was going to ever do software. Father was a big Salesforce person. I was like, oh, I'm not going to do software at all. So
What do you mean by
I
big
was,
Salesforce person?
he's been in the Salesforce ecosystem for like the last 10 years. So like he's been like a principal architect on the sort of professional services side of Salesforce. And I was just like, not my thing for years.
Got it.
So I was going to be a physicist. So I went to Penn. I got 5 degrees, 3 bachelors, 2 masters in 5 years. Got into Stanford for a PhD in biophysics. Dropped out because that's the thing you do if you get to Stanford. Then
It's
it's
the
just the thing.
unofficial official degree.
Yeah,
The real Stanford graduates didn't graduate kind of thing.
yeah, exactly. So that's what I did. Started a company called Supply Vault doing AI, supply chain artificial intelligence for defense companies. Didn't go great. Then started as a, then I had to, at some point you have to feed yourself, so you have to get a job. And then so I joined a company called Gordian Software, which is a YC company. Tina, have you ever like booked a flight on like Booking.com, Priceline, those large travel websites?
Yeah, not my fondest memories.
It was kind of funny. I think before 2015, if you ever like booked a seat on like those large companies,
Hmm.
line APIs are just like broken. So what would happen is they didn't want to integrate, so they would just send it to some guy in Indonesia or some gal in Indonesia, and they
Yeah.
would put a virtual credit card. It was crazy. So at Gordian, we
By
solved
the way,
that.
do you know the company Duffel?
Yes, we were competitors with them.
Yeah, I have an episode with Steve Sobel from Duffel. I wasn't the one posting it, my colleague Ash. But I that was the first introduction I had to this. I only have context for this reason. It's
Yeah,
pretty bad.
Duffel's really interesting. They've taken like a I'm going to displace Amadeus type of approach, which is very brave
Hmm.
of them. And Gordian took a more like let's be the glue. Let's not take away the economics. So there was different philosophy. But regardless, then started Pontus. There was a story about a tweet and being introduced to a bunch of C-level executives at banks somewhere in there. But we'll get to
Couple
that.
Silicon Valley cliches that are actually true. Can I ask a couple of questions before we move
Sure.
on? You said you never thought you'd be in software. You started as a physicist. What did you think? What was your vision for yourself at that time? Did you have like more of an academic pathway in mind or
I wanted to
Higgs
be a
kind of situation? Yeah.
I was in biophysics, so we were doing simulations on like scales that are much smaller than the eye can see, and I just wanted to be a professor. I published like 3 or 4 papers as an undergrad, which not to toot my horn.
No, this is the time, if ever there was, to toot your horn.
Academics get so like when you get to the real world, you're like, who cares about these papers? But academics, that's the currency of like prestige, to be honest.
Hmm.
So I published 3 to 4 papers and an entire PhD program in my field might publish 3 papers, and I just did that as an undergrad, which was like, I was like, wow.
What were they? Did they have a theme? Were they all different? What were they about?
They were about so it was simulating drug compounds to target protein targets. So like when you're developing a drug molecule,
Is this like CAD for biology?
basically, yeah, that's what we would do. And it's kind of fascinating. A lot of drugs are still like you have hundreds of thousands of test tubes. You're making random molecules, you're dumping in test tubes and seeing if you're binding.
This is
For us,
exactly what I
we
imagine scientists do, by the way.
that's how the industry still works.
Yeah.
Our approach was let's use some data, let's use some machine learning, let's like instead of doing 100,000, let's do 10,000 and you'll get the most compounds. And that was our sort of philosophy.
10,000 simulated instead of actual test tubes.
Yeah. And then you can say, you would simulate all the 100,000. You say, these are the 10,000 ones that are the most likely. Don't waste
Mm,
all your resources to
right,
do
right,
that.
right, right. So you can prioritize. That makes sense. And just quick tally. 5 degrees in 4 years.
In 5 years, 5 for 5.
5 for 5. And physics, biology.
So I got a bachelor's in physics, biophysics, and biochemistry. And then I got a master's in comp sci and uh, chemistry, but it was a theoretical chemistry. So more physics than chemistry.
Okay, so not a finance background.
Absolutely not.
Got it. But it sounds like you had like a really good entryway to the world of AI and optimization from like just a different angle.
Yeah, like all the papers, like it was interesting in my field where I would read biology papers, then I would read computer science papers and AI papers. And it was just the synergy of those two things.
Got it. I'm going to come back to this in a little bit, but you gave us a quick like 101 on Pontus. Let's dig into a little bit about, I really liked how you worded it, turning cost centers into value. How did you word it? Turning like inefficient processes into ROI?
Yeah, turning cost centers into value drivers.
Turning cost centers into value drivers. So specifically, you're working with the finance industry, as I understood.
Yeah, finance teams, accountants, controllers, FP&A teams.
So can you give us a picture of what that looks like translated in this specific industry? Like, what are some use cases you'd work on? What was your entry point? And it'd also be interesting to hear the story of how you landed on such a specific group in a specific industry, especially given the background that you came from and the previous venture that you were a part of, which was in the travel world.
So the story of how we got into this was kind of funny. After Gordian, I decided to, when my co-founder Rashab, we were like, let's start a company. Rashab is a great guy. Tagline was he was on the AI team that found Osama bin Laden, some crazy background that he can't tell much about. He's very paranoid, but that story for another day.
It's a story I'd
And
love to hear when he's ready. Maybe
I
in
don't
50
think he
years
would.
when it's.
Yeah, maybe some truth serum type of thing will get him to speak about it. But that's the only thing the government allows him to say about it. So, anyways, we wanted to do something like a startup. He had a very heavy privacy background, so we were like, let's do privacy and AI. Got 3 to 4 enterprise POCs
Mm-hmm.
in like December 2024,
Yeah, and
January
just
4th.
just to clarify, can you describe what do you mean by privacy and AI? Like, what does that mean? Explain in simple
So,
terms.
so it was a scary time at that time where you had ChatGPT, and there was this like big scandal where a large enterprise brought in ChatGPT. They started typing things, and then someone could just retrieve information because they're training on your data, and that was a breach. And what we were trying to do is, hey, you could get 95% of the value of ChatGPT if you anonymized info. So instead of saying Tina, if I'd recognize that's a person, let's just replace it with like John Doe, and that was our anonymization layer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was such a great idea. After I got married on the January 4th of 2024, January 20-ish or something, OpenAI created an enterprise edition. So they built that feature into all their enterprise editions,
Mm-hmm.
and our business kind of dried up.
So it
Then
was a
we
little
were
demo validated.
it was a feature, not a product, which was a big,
Mm.
we were solving an important issue, but it's not an issue that other providers wouldn't think of, right? It was on their roadmap.
Yeah, it was like no mo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so we said, okay, we need to actually solve a core problem that is hard to disrupt. But we were 2 25-year-olds at that point, and we're like, what the heck? We know nothing about enterprise software, right? Like very little other than the experience at Gordian and there.
And your
So
father.
and my dad, and also Rishab's dad, he runs a consultancy for large governments. But regardless, we started to like who knows the most about the internal guts of these organizations? Like, where's the mess? Like, not the pretty exterior that every company says, we're great, we have the best technology, we have the best people. Like, every company, I know, every CEO knows, inside, it's always chaos. And don't feel bad. Every company is chaos inside. We said, okay, it should be a consultancy. And of course, the Accenture, the BCGs, and Deloittes of the world wouldn't work with us. And we said, we need to go for a consultancy that's up on the rise. I found this guy named Sandeep Kumar Sood from Kunai. He sold his first consultancy, Capital One. He built a new consultancy that services the top 10 banks, all 4 payment networks, MasterCard, Visa, Discover, everyone, right? I was like, if we chat with them, maybe there's a place, some connection. So I just tweeted at him. I was like, you're going to build the next Accenture of finance. We chatted, and he started introducing me to his network. He's just like, I think you guys are great. I see a lot myself. I started my first company when I was 20-ish. Let me just introduce you to my network. So I started meeting lots of large banks, lots of executives, their operational teams, and just discovered this gap in finance. And that's how we got to this problem space.
Got it. And walk us through what that discovery process looked like for someone who's maybe listening and thinking of starting something maybe in their own industry. I think sometimes it can seem like a black box if you don't come from a world of MVPs and discovery. Like, what does that actually look like? Like, who do you speak to? Who do you ask for an intro to? What questions do you ask? What did that process look like for you before you got to the problem that you're solving now? And what was the timeline where this unfolded for you?
Yeah. So we were introduced early 2024 to the C-level execs of a lot of banks. And there was a viewpoint where they introduced us to, and I said to them, I don't want to focus on the glamorous stuff. Like someone's already looking at customer experience, someone's already looking at your product,
I
everyone's
love
looking
how
at
you call
revenue
that
generation.
glamorous, but
Yeah,
in
it
comparison,
is.
maybe.
I feel like people, and when you talk to C-level execs, they don't understand how much value is trapped in their unsexy stuff. I think it's fascinating, like finance, HR, legal, and they start introducing us to each
Yeah,
department.
you kind of take them. Would you say they take it for granted?
They do.
Yeah.
They often do, and they just don't look at it. And then we started talking to finance particularly, and we saw everyone's kind of like an accountant has a lot of processes that they understand, but from a technologist point of view, they have 8 different systems of records. They're grabbing data from the systems of records, putting it into a spreadsheet, creating a report, and then putting it back into a different system of record, and then communicating through Slack. Every single process can just be dumped into that. Like not every single one, but like 50, 30% could be. And you saw
Hmm.
that it was important processes. So like if they made a mistake on this, it goes into the P&L line. If you misreport finance,
Compounding. Then you don't know at what point the mistake, yeah,
and it's crazy,
diminishes.
right? Look, they have tax implications that if you're a
Mm-hmm.
when you're a small company, if you make a mistake, it might be K there, 100K there. But if you're a
Mm-hmm.
large company, it scales up to tens of millions of mistakes.
Yeah.
And so we said, this is crazy. And you start asking them, like, they know it's a problem. Everyone knows, right? Why hasn't this been solved? And it's not because they don't know it's a problem or they don't think they could be solved. It's they have bad choices. Because they're in an undervalued segment, they don't get an
Like they have bad
engineering team.
options
Yeah, they do.
and
Like
resources, like limitations. Yeah.
they have to go to an overstretched internal team that's trying to maintain their ERP, which sucks. They have to go to either a consultant like that will there's the stories where you pay $5 to $6 million and you get a slide deck at the end and nothing gets done, or you go to a software provider, which some of them are great, but it really depend. But the ones you might have the software, but then you have to go to a consultant, and your outcomes are very determined
Yeah, like does
by
your
the
skill have
people.
the team to implement and maintain it? Do you have the right teams willing to like participate in it? Yeah. I mean, I understand that
Yes,
problem very well. Coming from the
and
software world. Yeah.
and so what we said to them is, you should be buying outcomes. You should be saying, I want this outcome, which might be tied to a business case. It might be tied to a directional process. And
Hmm.
you should implement that outcome and then only pay us if we deliver. So our whole process is outcome oriented. That means when we talk to the people, we actually talk to the people doing the work. We have this thing where we start now we recently started recording videos of them. We get a whole process out. Like we take
Yeah.
tens of videos and we're like, this is the actual process. Then we build a prototype in a week. We're like, this, do you like this? Do you like all this stuff on top of our platform? And they're like, no, I don't like this. So we change it. And then there's a couple of months of integration, fighting through InfoSec, all that stuff, but they only pay once it's in. And that's the transformation, being outcomes oriented rather than here's a license to a large software.
A couple of questions. Given your background coming from like a legitimate mad scientist in my head, lab setting, like true experimentation, like really in the field, and your training with biological systems, I'm curious how that informed your approach to doing this kind of investigation, or do you think it influenced it in a way that might be different from someone who's maybe from the industry or more from like a pure computer science AI background?
Yeah, I think it's about
Because you almost created a lab like experience in the way that you did the investigation with like video recordings is not typically that's not the data. I don't want to say the data driven approach people take, but it's so realistic, and you're not doing a form or a survey. You're like actually taking a video of the real situation and studying it.
if you work in a biology lab, you oftentimes what happens is you get this protocol. I'm telling you, no biologist follows the protocol to a T because biology is different. Like, for example, I talked about yeast cultures. You make the buffer, all this, and yeast like bacteria. If you follow the protocol exactly and you do it one day and the next day, the growth of your yeast will be drastically different. So
Yeah.
as
I mean, I think anyone
biologists, you
who's
got,
tried to make bread or yogurt could attest to that also.
course. So you
Yeah.
gotta play jazz, right? Like you gotta basically say, you know what? When I'm making my bread, let me add a little bit of flour. This is too dry. Let me add a bit of water. And this sort of, I feel like mathematicians and AI folk or pure theorists, right, will
Yeah.
kind of look at the world and they'll be like, there's a protocol. It will fit this protocol. Let me try to get this very specific general solution.
Can I listen? This was not planned. I have this on my desk.
Yeah.
Can I read you a
Okay.
quote?
Sure.
If you could humor me. A distinguishing feature of systems studied by chaos theory is that unstable aperiodic behavior can be found in mathematically simple systems. Very simple, rigorously defined mathematical models can display behavior that is awesomely complex. Another distinguishing characteristic of chaotic systems, which I believe is kind of what you're describing, is that there's sensitive dependence on initial conditions. Like, for example, that first report that leads into like 10 other reports. Infinitesimally small changes at the start lead to bigger changes later on. This behavior is described as the signature of chaos. I don't know if that's relevant.
It is. I actually studied chaos theories in some of my grad courses.
Okay, this is the
It
most
is.
intro level, so apologies if that was very
Oh
simplistic.
no, it's all
It's the level I'm
it,
at.
no, it's a fascinating field. But yeah, look, your initial conditions influence how you behave, and then errors continue to perpetuate. And what kind of occurs is in a lot of discovery, when you're trying to understand the problem, a lot of vendors will just tell you this is the solution. Instead of trying to
Mm-hmm.
understand what is, right? Like what is life for this person doing the
Right.
work. And that's been our guiding principle from the beginning. We don't pitch solutions, we often try to understand. And half the time we're just like, if a company isn't willing to let us understand, we don't work with them. Like
And right.
it's that
The first,
strong of a
yeah.
principle for us.
Yeah, that sounds like a I love that. And obviously what your approach is working because you're just over a year into this project. You have several enterprise contracts live and up and running. Let's get a little bit more tangible. So, can you give us some examples of how you engage with your customers and what are some specific use cases you work on with them on? And specifically, I'd love to dig into, you kind of tangentially referred to this. Why don't certain, like you mentioned, why certain like software solutions may not work out the way that you were hoping that they would? Can you maybe dig into why certain AI solutions specifically don't work out and what are the challenges that you need to navigate? Because sometimes it's not like that there's an issue with the software. It might be cultural, as you said, there might be resource or like skill gaps. Tell us a little bit more kind of about how that entire process looks for you today.
So let's talk about a specific example, like a financial planning analysis team, FP&A. And just for context for people who aren't in the space, what FP&A does is they take the data inputs of all the company, and a C-level exec will say, I want to understand this about my business. And a
Yeah.
question they might
Yeah.
have is like, what is the allocation of time of my employees on a specific project? And so I can make some decisions for the
And
next
can you
ones.
give us an understanding of what kind of scales we're working with? Because that sounds like, oh, that makes sense. But like, what kind of like size company is this? Because this is probably much more complex than how you just described it, right?
Yeah, it's 5,000 employees. They have engineering talent, they have accounting talent, they have IT talent, they have people who are customer reps, like all the gamut. Like, and what typically happens, like the sort of traditional approach in FP&A is you get really some smart people who are accountants, and they'll basically create a model and they'll take some guesses. They'll say, okay, let me tell my 5,000 plus employee to do some surveys. I'm going to just send some surveys out. They're going to report to the surveys, and then they're going to tell me an answer. And now I'm going to crunch the data every month and
Mm-hmm.
to give my exec. And you start asking the exec, like, did you know this was happening? Like, wait, I'm telling my revenue centers to take an hour out of their week to tell what all my employees are doing? Like, no, we had no idea. And you're like, and
To do
no
this
one's
survey, for
make
example.
yeah,
Like
like
that's like 5,000 people doing an hour-long survey, not including the time to process the outcome of the survey.
exactly.
Quite a lot of
And you don't
hours,
even know.
given that
Also,
everyone even fills it and not including the chasing time for the people that didn't
exactly.
complete it.
That's a lot of time, but you don't even know if it's accurate. Like because we're people, I can't tell you what I did yesterday or the day before. I'm not sure if you could tell like what you did. And so we look at that and we say, okay, can we, and this is the visceral part. We tell them record the person taking the survey, record the person processing the surveys, and then the
Like
report, and they
literally
look at it.
camera in the office.
Usually everyone's on Zoom now, so we ask permission for
Okay.
them to record, and we're like, or if it's a web browser, you can often like put some tracing things where you can just see
Yeah.
them fill
I
out
mean,
the
I've
form,
tried
and
that
you're
as
just,
well to track myself and see what am I making sense of myself as well. Yeah.
and then you show the execs, you show the team leads, you show everyone. They're like, oh, I didn't know this process was impacting my company in a negative, bad way just for this report. And then you say, okay, let's figure out, because this is important. Executives need to be able to make decisions. What is the right way to approach it? We say, well, since we're in Pontus, we connect to all the systems, records, and work apps. So we are connected to GitHub, we're connected to Atlassian, we're connected to Google Docs, your sheets, everything. We say, well, those apps are generating data. They're saying logs, they're saying who's logging in. You can see all the time, you can see all that. Great, let's pull all that data in. No one needs to do anything. Great, once the data's in, you talk to the FP&A team, and they're like, well, I'm not. We do our data analysis in Google Sheets, and you say, and usually there's some sort of IT person like, we shouldn't do anything in Google Sheets, XYZ. And you look at the time they're spending in Google Sheets, it's maybe like 2 or 3 hours, minuscule in the time wasted in the
Yeah.
surveys. That's
Why
just
not use
dumb.
Google Sheets? Is that a dumb question? What's the issue? Like they should use Excel or
No, everything's good on Google Sheets. It's just usually there's a sort of other vendors will come in and say the problem is Google Sheets, and they say they have to move into a large data platform to warehouse it, and XYZ might be useful for a large scale, but 8,000 rows of data, it's no one's gonna die every month, right? So you just say to them, you meet them where they are. That's like one principle of ours. Like, hey, okay, we have this data, dump into Google Sheets. Great. And then you want to create a report that's on a monthly cadence. We say, okay, just do an equal sign, drag the data, type in gen report, dumps the report into
this part is
Drive.
Pontus.
Yep, this
This
is
is a Pontus
Pontus.
function. Got it.
Yeah, Pontus function, where we integrate into the work tools rather than like forcing them into a new platform because they're
Got it.
not programmers, right? Like they need to work where they work. Equal sign, Pontus workflow, click and drag, dumps into Drive, slacks everyone. And that's how it should be. Like you feel like work is being done rather than you make a process and then you put the burden on someone else that you don't know and you don't talk to.
Interesting. Can I ask a question about that? Because we didn't get to this when we last chatted. What led you to deciding to do it this way? Because I'm imagining that increases the technical complexity of your approach. Because now you have to have some kind of workflow integration on like hundreds of different tools, I'm guessing at some point. Can you explain this to me like I am the beginner that I am? Like, what does that look like from a technical perspective? Do you need like an API for everything? How do you translate these workflows for like Excel versus Google Sheets, for example? Never mind, like, how do you enter each of these softwares and act there from like the technical infrastructure perspective?
This was I would say like 3 or 4 years ago. I would say, man, this seems like you need like a huge professional services team and a huge transformation project to integrate everything. With now, like a lot of efficiencies of AI actually have come to engineering. Like for example, all these tools have open API specs. With our
Mm-hmm.
platform, we take all the specs, we have a common data model, and we just say, translate this, integrate, boom. And it's not a hurdle. The largest hurdle is actually, since we work with banks, going through InfoSec, IT, and so on, and we have figured out how to work with these banks, but it's more of an educational aspect on like, how is this safe? How do we make sure you're okay? All those types of things.
Got it.
The integration is not that hard anymore. Sorry, go ahead.
Got it. And how do you address those concerns? Like, what are the top three, maybe not objections, but concerns that you've noticed coming up? And what is your approach to addressing them?
Number one, since we work,
And sorry, are these US based or do you also work in other regions? Or do some of your
we're
customers have presence elsewhere?
we're Global 2000. So we work with Global 2000. So the number one objection would be I am not completely sure about the ROI. I think IBM made a study that said only a quarter of AI projects have an ROI positive case. The way we address it is our process. We have great technology, fantastic, but like when we talk to a customer, we do a discovery session, we process mine, meaning like we understand their process through data. And a third meeting, they have a prototype. And the fourth is like they only pay to go to production. And so we tell them
Yeah.
this by definition needs to be ROI positive because there's a business case of less risk and so on.
Yeah, and you have a really bold pricing model to show evidence that,
I like to think we're Costco, where you would be stupid enough to not buy the membership because there's so much value for you. So that's
is
how
that
I
your
think about
tagline
this.
on the website?
No, I should
Click
probably.
here to.
Yeah, maybe I should give some Pontus
I would A/B
Costco
test that
membership
before.
gold star. Yeah,
That could be a very clever marketing campaign for very cheap.
yeah,
You heard it here
it
first.
would be. Buy it now, $60 a year. The second objection we would have is we are a startup, so they'll ask us about like compliance,
Hmm.
regulatory, security. The first thing we do is the amount of preparation we come in. So when we
Hmm.
talk to the InfoSec teams, we say we don't run a multi-tenant system. We say we deploy a single tenant software that you have access to. We'll put the code in escrow for you to review.
Got it.
We are so open and transparent of how we work. We
Hmm.
like other AI companies will say we have the best technology in the world, and they will be an open AI wrapper, and they won't tell you upfront. We have an architecture. We just tell you exactly what we're doing because our value is the outcomes we deliver, not our technology. And the third thing is the sort of why should we? I think this is actually the most important. It's like how do we get budget for this? Like we're a cost center. We've never really the only software we buy is like your SAP, Oracle, and those are multi-million dollar contracts. How do
Hmm.
I buy an incremental software that's 100K a year or 200K a year? Like how do I make that justification?
Can we just take a moment to really appreciate that it is actually sometimes more difficult to buy something that costs less than a multi-million dollar tag because for companies of this scale, they're not used to that engagement. It sounds counterintuitive, but I work in sales, so obviously have noticed this as well, and it surprised me very much initially.
And it's because they want this sort of the well-meaning, and it's usually from the technical side. It's usually from the technical teams who are saying we should buy something with so much capabilities so that we're covered
It's
for the
almost like a
years.
validation of how legit it is that it's such a big scale of investment, would you say?
Exactly. And but the thing is, if you talk to the people actually using the software, the non-technical people, they're like, we're only using 5% of the capabilities and we're paying this much and I don't see my value. And in fact, I'm fighting it every day.
Can I just, sorry, this is a little bit tangential, but if you don't mind, feel free to veto this. Can we take a moment to double click on that? Because from what I've observed, being in software sales, so at the crux of that, that is changing. That mentality and the rigor of considering whether the entire platform is worth the value, I think that's being really questioned at this moment. Would you also share that observation? I'm curious what your perspective on that is.
I think so. I don't think Pontus could exist 5 years ago. The
Okay.
reason why is build versus buy decisions are becoming more competitive, where there's an argument that an internal team could build this.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two ways to think about this. You can, if you're the large incumbents,
Mm-hmm.
like I think Databricks provides a lot of value, but if you compare it to like Microsoft SQL Server, they are like people are like reconsidering. They're like,
I'm gonna
maybe I
come to you
should
the next time I have a competitive. No, I'm kidding.
maybe we should look at the other players because maybe we could, based upon our Microsoft SQL Server, which is a $10 million a year contract, we could build this potentially. Like it's a complex software. But if you go to with Pontus, what means is like we typically compete with the traditional RPA providers, and you see that
Sorry, what is RPA?
robot process automation like UiPath, I would say Appian and so on. Their whole business model is we have a robot that automates this, but we won't guarantee the outcome. So like you'll pay 50K a year for a robot that will in manual data entry.
And
And you'll
sorry,
see,
this is
go ahead.
robot versus AI agent, which sounds like they're interchangeable in the way that you described it, but I'm assuming that's not true.
It isn't. An AI agent will make decisions automatically. Robots will make decisions in a deterministic way. So
Like if then,
if this form is the same, like it doesn't change, the robot will be able to do it. But if the form changes, the robot breaks.
like
Like if
I
you're
use
near.
Zapier,
Yeah. Zapier. Yeah.
so constantly troubleshooting
Constantly, right? And the
something
AI
broke. Yeah.
age, yeah. And with Pontus, I think what kind of we've realized is we try to provide such a tremendous value at low risk. So if you're comparing us to internally someone buying, we say to them, well, would your internal team guarantee you that if they don't succeed, that you get your money back? They're like, no. The second one is, does your internal team have the ability to be a integrated platform where like if you have a sort of instead of a one-off solution where you write some code and then someone will maintain it, do they have the ability to own this? And then the third thing is we try to make the total cost of ownership cheaper than having an internal team of 8 people maintaining it. This was impossible like a couple of years ago. Like a couple of years ago, with like you didn't have the inefficiencies of coding, then like all the margin has gone into making engineering teams productive, and that's what we're passing back to our customers.
On that note, you made a point that where do I get budget for this? So some of the operational efficiencies not being fully under control can create things that create risk for the firm. And in some ways, literally you're addressing a cost center, but then on the other hand, it's revealing perhaps like revenue opportunities. I'm curious if you think that's a fair kind of MECE way to look at it. And what your perspective is on that, and what your perspective is on your own ROI. Like, would you lean towards any of those buckets?
I think I'm going to seal that. Yeah, we basically approach it in all three. Typically, this is the educational aspect for the executive team where they see cost centers and they see operational efficiency bucket doesn't affect the rest of my business. And then you
Mm-hmm.
talk to the actual processes they run and they're like, shoot, like in the FP&A example, you have compliance and risk concerns because like now that model might be used for a tax audit. And then you're like, shoot, that's connected. They're using that because, of course, a team is
By
going to
might, you
use
mean
things
100% will be.
exactly.
There's going to be a tax audit for sure.
Especially in regulated industries. And then you talk to them and the way they run their process, because these cost centers, finance, legal, actually affect every employee. And then you
Mhm.
realize they choose a process that's convenient for them to do, but not convenient for the rest of the company. And then imagine 5,000 growing revenue center just spending an hour a week on something that could have been an hour writing a PRD, committing code. And if you're a small company, maybe doesn't matter too much. But in a large company, if you slow down one person, like a manager doesn't respond to an employee, they might not do that work that day. And you're just causing this ripple effect of inefficiency.
That infinitesimally small initial state change can lead to what was it? I don't. The
Uh,
book's closed. Can you walk us through like? You said it's the educational piece. How do you normally approach the conversation? Like, is the entry point the cost center? Like, it's something like everyone's on the, it's understandable to people, it makes sense to them, and then kind of open the door to other, like, what's been the way that you guide this conversation? And any surprising insights? Like, have you had a situation where you've started the conversation around operational efficiency because that made sense to your customer, and then through the process of maybe doing an MVP with them or engaging with them, you actually had a really surprising outcome where it impacted positively something in a completely different use case that they weren't thinking about? Maybe you were thinking about it, but they wouldn't be open to chatting about it until they saw something like that come about. I don't know if you have any stories.
yeah. So typically, I think a large bank will not give you the most pressing problem they have on a docket if you're a new vendor. Never will happen. They will give you a trial project to just see how you do. And the trial project might not be incredibly significant, but they're just trying to see what your process is.
Yeah.
And they'll see if
Very
it's
fair.
repeatable.
Yeah.
100%. Like if I
Yeah.
was in their shoes, I would do that too. And the thing I would ask is just be honest when you're doing that, right? Like that's the best thing. And what we learned is for Pontus, because we integrate with all your layers. That's the best type of project. Like it might be 50K or 100K of one time sort of fees, right? And then you get integrated into Atlassian, GitHub, Google Workspaces, all that stuff. And the second project they start like imagining, they're like, oh, you're already integrated into all these things. And I would say 40 to 60% of processes depend upon some sort of work application. And they're like, could you do this? And it starts expanding into bigger and bigger projects. And that's how we do it. And one of the most important things is like our big differentiator is you're talking to not a salesperson, you're talking to an engineer. Like you will never talk to, whenever you're talking to someone, you're talking to someone who's actually an expert on what they do. So when they talk to you, they might not be an expert on what you do, which is the important part, but they will be engineers. They'll be able to understand your process. They'll be smart, sharp people. And that is the same group of people who will take on the second project and the third project, fourth
If
project.
you're
And
within that
they're
room,
exactly.
which it sounds like you are.
And why that's important is if you look at the average tenure of a person in a large company, it might be like 2 years, 2 to 3 years. And if we're a vendor in a department, we might be have more institutional knowledge. Like it's kind of happening where we were talking to an enterprise customer. The person who they were trying to work with, working on running this process, quit in the middle of the year to go to work in our company. And we carry that institutional knowledge, so it's not a whole crisis event for them. And that's
Wow.
just something surprising I didn't know. Like vendors often stay with the company for a lot longer than employees will
Yeah.
in a
And their
competitive
teams
market.
have like years of engagement notes and, one of the things we haven't dug into yet is the human side of, okay, AI, that's really like a big topic. But you talked about how you address one of the challenges with implementing like a new vendor or software from like a technical perspective. You bring your technology to them rather than bringing their stuff to your stack. It would be one of the blind spots is, people have a lot of fears and misconceptions about AI, particularly in a situation.
Uh,
Yeah, like this is very close to their workflow. I'm sure not everyone would be happy to have you running an MVP on them. Like the people that you're engaging with are probably like the leaders of the team or the top performers who like would love, a helping hand in the form of technology, but maybe not everyone on their team's on board. What has been your experience in terms of like resistance to AI, maybe implicitly, more from like a human perspective, more from an emotional perspective? Like what has been some reactions, things you've noticed, particularly implicitly, and what are people worried about and how do you address it?
yeah, I think is like, are you taking away my job? Is the number one concern. In an engagement, I think of our partners as partners. So we have a therapy session with like literally like they don't know it's a therapy session, but it
Well,
is
maybe
where
they will have to. Well, what do you call it? Like office hours or something?
no, I just have one-to-ones, and we generally, one of our values is walk in your customer's shoes. So if you're walking in your customer's shoe, you should know who they live with, what are their goals, what are their ambitions, what are their things, right, they want to do. And you first talk about like why they first ask, is this going to take away my job? And you first realize, you tell them, how overloaded are you right now? And they're like, well, I literally have no time. They're like, literally, they're working past overtime all the time. They're working on weekends all the time. I'm like, so do you think if we automate something and get you back to a normal work schedule that it's going to affect you, or they're going to give you more responsibilities? They're like, likely more responsibilities to get back to the same amount because at any large company, there's so much to do. There's no one just sitting there. And once they get that aha, they're like, oh, that's great. And then the second thing is they work in a regulated industry, in a
Mm-hmm.
regulated department that's in a P&L. Other, I won't name names, but other AI companies really focus on replacement, right? They're like, we're going to take away this person, so on. If you're in a regulated industry and you're working in a department that goes to the P&L and has tens of millions, guess what? Your job is safe because we need a human being to do the final check. I'm just trying to make it easier. So instead of you in quarter three make a fat finger mistake that costs tens of millions, I'm just trying to avoid that whole
Because you're on
scenario.
working on the weekend overtime again and you're exhausted.
Exactly. And the last thing is, once you start working efficiently, it's kind of funny. There was this, I forgot the book, study on like where reorgs, layoffs, all that occurs. It doesn't occur in efficient companies. Like if you look at like the operating margins, all that, it occurs in companies that have low operating margins. Like being the best of quality is the way to keep your company growing and also your job safe and like just being at the highest standard. No one has ever punished someone working at the best way they can.
Yeah,
That's usually those three segments. Yeah, go ahead.
and is there a distinction? This is, let's call them like practitioners, people in the field, people closest to the work that you are creating efficiencies for. Have you noticed a difference in the objections or maybe implicit concerns with like the executives of that team? And what would those look like?
The executives on the team, I would say when I talk to them, some of them are very tuned in, but I would say the majority are don't really know have a sense things are slowing down, right? They have this sense, they have this gut feeling, and they know it's occurring, and there's a lot of anxiety from that. And they're not sure why. And what typically will happen
The
is
survey
they'll
isn't
talk to
answering the question.
it typically isn't. And what will happen is oftentimes they'll try to go for an easy solution like an MBB consultant who might be a very smart
Yep.
person right
And
out of
MBB, for
college.
those who may not use that acronym,
I forgot what the act
I think it's McKinsey,
McKinsey,
Bain,
Bain,
and BCG,
BCG, and yeah, and
and that's
those
it.
guys, I think so. Those guys are good. Or gals are good. They're great. But like oftentimes it's just a slide deck and not actual ROI implementation. They're like, here's what we think the problem is, and they get this fancy 50 slide deck and they're like, okay, great, let's now go do the work.
Hmm.
Or they go to a non-consultative software vendor who will just pitch them solutions and they're like, okay, let's do this transformation project. And it's like 3 to 4 years. And because we're pretty like focused on outcomes, we keep on telling them like, you have to get tangible. You have to be able to say like, this is the problem that's costing me this amount of money. And like, they'll refer me into their operations teams and I build a business case. Like I literally show them a business case that they have a net present value calculation, and they're like, great, that's how you should think about it. And you have to just go back to basics. And it's so hard when there's all this hype to not go back to basics, what things they learned in like
Hmm.
their MBA if they did the MBA.
I wanted to double click. You said some executives are more tuned in. Can we dig into that? What would the characteristics be of someone that you described as tuned in? Whether as like someone more in the field or someone more in a leadership.
Number one is they're pretty no BS. They're pretty direct on
Hmm.
like, they're just like, I know I've talked to, you can get them, get specifics. I've talked to X person in this department who is running down, they need help here. And they'll list the 4 or 5. Super tuned in. The second one is they are incredibly suspicious of everything. Like they will like fight back. Like, and I enjoy that. And it's just like they will say to me, why blah blah blah. And some people will BS them. Other people will say, here's my answer. I don't know. Like every time and the executives who are tuned in, when you hear an I don't know, they sigh of relief because they're like, this person's not gonna BS me. I'm not gonna BS them. And the third thing is they say, I don't know. Like they're like, I don't know, go figure it out, like type of thing. So those are the three aspects I usually see.
Through the engagement that you've had via Pontus, through people at all the different layers of these financial organizations, what is the range of familiarity with the world of AI generally and how it might impact them as like a human in society, but also specifically in their worlds?
I think everyone's at ChatGPT level. Everyone knows what ChatGPT does. They know how
Hmm.
to use the tools like, oh, I need this report, generate this email. Everyone's good at that. Then I think there's a lot of people fighting to bring in AI, but they don't know what are the capabilities in specific
Hmm.
places and where not to use it. Um, that that aspect is more of a educational aspect we have to deal with often because I would say a lot of our people who are advocating for it are they have their place at the right place, but they need to pick their spots. The reason why is like
Hmm.
IBM had this study is like 25% of AI projects are ROI positive, only 16% of projects go from POC or MVP to production. That simply comes from people selling vaporware, basically products that are don't have really anything else in them. They seem very shiny, but when you use it, it doesn't actually produce value. I don't know if you were reading the news. There was this company called Builder.ai.
Hmm.
They raised $450 million Series D from Microsoft, very legit. They went bankrupt yesterday. They're filing for bankruptcy. Great investors, great founders, great everything, but it was like the most hype-based thing where like I type in some words, I get a fully app. And you unfortunately reality is much harder than an MVP. And so we basically tell them when we break down a process from an empirical way, it's like you have to break it down into software, like what steps should be done by software, what steps should be done by an AI, and then what steps should be done by a person.
Yeah, I like that framework.
First principles, like
First
just,
principles.
and then you mark the human stuff. You're like, in the future, maybe this could be done by AI, and since it's in a platform, we can change that. But Don't
Hmm.
bite more than you can chew before you can. Maybe that's a very conservative take. A lot of our executives who talk to me like, you sound super conservative. I'm the one pushing you, and you're telling me to pull back.
In our last conversation, you alluded to a business case framework that you, like a template that you'd be open to sharing as a link.
Yep.
And
I
can you
think
tell us a
I,
little bit more about that and what people can maybe use it for?
yep. It's stolen from management consultants, and it's called situation, complication, recommendation. And basically, if you think about any sort of scenario or problem, the situation is what is happening right now? Like, what is the good things we're doing? What are the bad things? What is occurring? Complication is based upon the situation, what we have, what's going wrong? Like, why do we need to change? What's the problem? And then the recommendation is not a solution on like, here's the software platform, but it's more like,
Hmm.
what is the approach to solve this problem that would lead us to the solution? And that's, you can break down a lot of problems into situation, complication, recommendation. It's a one pager. And you basically, once you write this business case, you start sharing with people. You're like, hey, is this right? Is this wrong? People start
Hmm.
commenting. It gives everyone to say, if you're aligning 12 people, writing is more effective than a 15-page slide deck.
Hmm.
And they can just look at it and read it and understand what's going on.
So we'll
Great.
link that in the episode links in the
Mhm.
description so you can take a look. Rapid fire question time. Are you ready?
Great. Let's go.
What's the most surprising thing you've learned or seen from AI technology in the last year that changed your perspective?
I think the most surprising thing for me was basic decisioning. So you can basically tell it, hey, you have three choices, and based upon this data, make a choice. Like it's first, it was like 60%, like great. Now it's getting to this point where if you have 3 to 4 choices, it's like 99%. And that's getting to the point where you can put it into a lot of processes, which is really exciting for us.
Can you break down how what we mean by like 66 versus 60 versus 90% grade? Like based on what benchmark?
I'm comparing it to like an intern. Like we basically have this one of the features we have is basically, and I think all the data providers will have this, where you can basically have a question, and that question will go into, let's say I have a question, it's about this data, one table. You can only do filters, selects, where's, group bys, very simple ones. And in this question, I just basically need to one select filter where it's able to do like a year ago it was like 60% accurate of doing the right choices in the planning to
Mhm.
get to your answer. Now it's getting to like this nice 95, 99, and it's only great on the level of like a table, but once you introduce two tables, three tables, it becomes not deterministic in the answer.
What is the most unconventional application of AI that you've seen in the last couple of years?
Conventional. This is hard because I've seen a lot of things, and it's like everything's kind of unconventional, so it's like picking a favorite out of all of them. But
Okay, well
the
we can rephrase it to your favorite.
so I have a friend who works in this company called Deep Scribe, which is medical transcribing. And one thing I love is they're taking this phone from a doctor, they put the scribe here, and people start talking like patients talking, and your doctor is usually on a computer screen. They use the scribe, and it's like putting data into your EHR so your doctor can actually talk to you. And I feel like that's just
So they're
fantastic.
not clicking, type.
Exactly. And I'm really excited about that. Of course, the doctor needs to go back and correct things, but it doesn't put the
Yeah.
pressure on them in the time to do things.
This might be a bit tangential, but there's this female Canadian comedian called, I think it's Lau Ramosa, and
Hmm.
she does these skits. And there's one series she does in a gynecologist's office that
Hmm.
is absolutely hilarious. And when you describe that, she captures that kind of the shorthand of that situation. It's just like someone just typing, asking you like non contextual questions.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that they're being malicious, but in the human interaction, you're missing the feeling of being empathized with, even if that's not at all like what they're meaning for. And I feel like that
Do you
goes
know why
along with
do you know why they did that, by the way?
the staring into the computer clicking or
Yeah. Yeah,
bad
yeah.
software.
It's compliance. So there was a law passed during the Bush administration, then the Obama administration, which required. So back in the past, you would have a physician assistant, and all the notes were being taken by the physician assistant. But by law, it was actually the doctor had to take notes, but they weren't complying with no one was checking. But when you had EHR software, the person logged in is being tracked. So that's why it transitioned. It was actually a compliance and regulatory capture thing, not the doctors wanting to do that. They don't want to do it either. They're being logged and tracked.
If you could wave a magic wand and instantly fix one inefficiency in the global economy with AI, where would you start?
I would say this one is super meta. To be honest, I look at healthcare as one of the United States, like that's we work in the financial services industry, but like like healthcare is one of there's a various reasons for that. Healthcare is much harder than financial services to even introduce technology due to the monopoly that Epic Systems has. 30% of like healthcare costs go to administrative overhead, which is significant, and that's just like paperwork. And it feels that cost, and in the UK you have this great system called the NHS, but like uh, as long as we have a private healthcare industry, if you can tackle that, you can help a lot of people. Like that's one of the areas that, and it's just paperwork. It's not like medical services, not going to the pharma company. It's not, it's like paperwork. Like it's crazy.
Mm-hmm. I love that. We talked about this a bit earlier. AI often gets a bad rep for replacing jobs. You already referenced this in your own experiences. What's one job you think AI is actually better suited to than humans, and vice versa?
Cars, driving. I don't know if you've driven a Waymo. Have you been in a Waymo yet?
I did experience it for the first time last year in San Francisco.
I don't think self-driving cars is going to go into, but at least in the United States, like I was in SF last week. It's fantastic. Like it's great. It's coming
Mm-hmm.
to Atlanta where I live, where we're seeing Waymos drive around. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think like they're doing highway driving anytime soon, but like in this sort of area, like they're constraining the problem where traffic is well behaved. And like that seems like something, and there's a lot of back office stuff that would work, but that's like the most like my mom would understand. Like that's
Yeah.
something like she would like come in and be like, "Oh my God, we're in the future." Like we weren't thinking that was going to happen for. We were talking like 10, like it's been like a venture from Waymo for like the last 15 years, and now it's just like it's actually happening, which
Yeah.
is great.
Cool. And then my last question is, do you have any resources, books, podcasts, etc., that you are a big fan of and that you could recommend to the people listening?
Yep. So my favorite books are there's this let's start with podcasts. So Lenny's pod is a fantastic pod on just thinking about product people. Then his newsletter is also awesome. Wes Cow's newsletter on like just communication. Her philosophy is like communication is super costly in that like oftentimes if you don't phrase something well, if you have the wrong intention, and something I wasn't very considerate of for a long time, you can cause a lot of disruption in that like you can just waste a lot of time if you just don't say the thing the first time, right? So that was helpful. For the machine learning folks, I think Bishop's, it's a very academic text. There's a textbook from Bishop, it goes through machine learning, that's great. And then there's this great web series from Andrej Karapati, who walks you from like 0 to 1 to building an LM.
Is this like a
If you ever,
YouTube?
yeah, it's like 10 hours. I don't know who has time to read all that, but that's or listen to it. But he goes from like building an LM from 0 to 1 if you're of that computer science note. And I think the last book for us that was really helpful, it's this book called Selling With by Nate Narsala. I don't even really consider it a sales book, to be honest. Like, it's just like about walking inside of your partner's shoes, considering empathy, all those touchy-feely stuff that if you're an engineer, you don't really think about. And then
Mm,
because you can like go through, I'm a founder, I'm not trained by sales. Like, if you look on the internet, it's like very pushy and like not something I would like. And I was like, this is not how I'm going to approach. I don't even think about sales in the same way. I'm just like trying to help people solve problems. And Nate
mhm.
Marsala gives you sort of a consultative mindset, which I think is just helpful because life, all of life is kind of sales. Like whatever engineer, product manager, scientist, you're always kind of selling something, and it shows you there's a way to collaborate instead of compete. That type of mentality, which I appreciate. Um, those are all my books. That are good to read.
Awesome. Do you have any final thoughts? Something maybe we didn't get to that you want to tee off with?
I would say the last thing I would say is changing the perception of cost centers as cost centers, but actually value drivers is super important because you can, any CFO or COO, if you can drive margins in your business, that drives net
Mhm.
income. If you drive net incomes and you have better operating margins, that changes the multiple of your business. And you can just
Mhm.
add hundreds of millions of values that sometimes aren't think about because they always think about top line revenue.
Wise words. Sumant,
All
really enjoyed
right.
our conversation. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. All right. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. If you've gained value from this episode, please drop us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a like on YouTube. See you for the next one.